Hello, Truth Nation. This is the Platinum Truth, and I'm your host, Mike Martin. As promised, we have a very special episode today. We're sitting down with one of the most important and celebrated experts and authors in Canada about Islam, with her work being particularly focused on Islam in the Western world. Now, as mentioned last week, this is going to be an extremely honest and blunt conversation, which I'm sure you'll find very refreshing in its candid approach to what the Western world is facing right now when it comes to the existential threat inside the West, with Islam seeding itself and rapidly taking over Western civilization in every nation it's been able to get even a toe in the door. Elaine Ellinger is the founder of Perspectives on Islam, a public education initiative focused on Islamic doctrine as it relates to current events from the perspective of non-Muslims. Formerly the Canadian director and senior researcher for the European think tank, she launched the Perspectives on Islam Society in 2023 to educate the public about the foundational teachings of Islam using primary sources, with an emphasis on how these doctrines impact non-Muslims today. You can find a link to her website, her Substack, her YouTube channel, and her LinkedIn in the description of this video. So without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation with Islam in the West expert and author Elaine Ellinger. Welcome to the truth, the platinum truth. Are you ready? Live from Miami, Florida, USA, and broadcasting around the world. You're listening to the Platinum Truth Podcast, the show that covers everything going on that you need to know about. The people have voted. Are you ready? And now, here's your host, Mike Martin. Okay, so welcome to the Platinum Truth with Mike Martin. As promised, we have a very special guest today, somebody that is very experienced in the subject matter of Islam in the West, and the things that we really need to talk about today as citizens of Western civilization. I want to introduce to you Elaine Ellinger, joining the podcast. Thanks for joining, Elaine. It's been some time since we've been going back and forth trying to get this set up, so I appreciate you joining us. And if you can tell the audience a little bit about your background, your experience in this subject matter.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. It actually includes a lot more than just my professional life. It includes my life as a whole, because I was raised with 40 foster brothers and sisters, and we all got along. And we had every kind of variety of everything you can imagine there. And it was a wonderful environment. Now, when I was, because of all these foster children, of course, it's like an extended family, and I wanted to be a social worker. And so eventually I was doing child protection. And I ended up spending Christmas with a Baha'i refugee of the Iranian Revolution.
Okay.
And he told me about what had happened in 1979, how his friends, his family, they were tortured, they were killed simply because they were Baha'i. And I could hardly wrap my brain around that, really, killing people just because of what they believe.
Yeah, and of course, 1979, just for some context for the audience, that was the year that this current Islamic regime took over in Iran and really forcefully imposed their will on the people, with a very small portion of that population actually supporting them. So I just wanted to give the audience a little context there.
And a huge amount of violence and intimidation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was of course, the U.S. Embassy incident that happened right when that started. Right, I believe it was 444 days of keeping the U.S. Embassy employees hostage as well. So it was a very violent way of introducing this current Islamic administration to the world and even to their own citizens. Sorry, go ahead.
So that piqued my interest very much so. And it's funny when I was 20, 21, I got a Eurail pass. I traveled around Europe, and believe me, there was absolutely no fear for a female traveling on her own around Europe at that time. There was no EU. The countries were very easy to go between. There was no problem. But when I ran out of money, I headed to the UK, and I immediately got a job, like within a day. And I needed a place to live. I was trying to find a place to live. And I don't usually talk about this, but on reflection, years later, after I'd learned so much, as it is with many people, the pennies start to drop in place, and you see why things happened the way they did. Well, yeah, actually, I've never talked about this before. Okay, so I needed a place to stay, but there was a certain identifiable group that made me very nervous. And it was the way they looked at me. And you hear young women talking today in England, especially, how they're clicked at and such.
Yeah.
And, it's an identifiable group that does this. And so I'd never come across this before either. Now, I've worked with men all of my life. I have, 5 natural brothers, and goodness knows how many other foster brothers. I've always gotten along extremely well with men.
Yeah. That big of a household, you obviously know something about peace, keeping the peace.
Yeah. And this was really unusual. So I was kind of afraid to take a key from them because they would also have a key. They're a landlord.
Yeah.
And so finally it got to the point, because I didn't like this feeling in me. I had never felt, an antipathy towards any identifiable group before. And I didn't understand what it was and why it was. And so I went to this ABC cafeteria on Oxford Street, where there was a young man working who was from this identifiable group, but did not do that to me. And I said to him, I don't understand what's going on. Like, why do they look at me like that? Like, it's scary, And he said, well, before they come to this country, they want to read the magazines and know something about the country. So they get books like Playboy and such. And they think all the Western women are like that. And if they can just convince you that they're as good as a British man, then you'll be like that with them too.
Yeah.
He was wrong. He was guessing. That seemed logical to him, but it goes much, much, much deeper than that. But that satisfied my curiosity. And then I had been working at Whiteley's department store, and I got I hope this is okay for your listeners.
Oh, anything is okay. This show is called The Platinum Truth for a reason. We seek truth wherever it lay. So please go ahead.
So I wanted a job that was a fewer days a week, and then I could travel a bit more on the weekend around the UK with a Golden Rover pass. £2, you could go anywhere on that bus. And so I went back to the employment agency, and they were great. They just had all these jobs in the window, and you would go in. And I went in, and they said, well, right down the street here, hopefully get something nearby. There was a market, and it was a Pakistani market, and that, I could go work there. Well, I'd never worked till before, but I thought, sure, I'll give it a try. And this is before university and social work and stuff, of course. Anyway, so I go to this market, but I couldn't understand it. When I walked in the lunchroom, they all walked out. Nobody would talk to me. Nobody would help me on the till. It was incredible. I felt like a leper. And finally, like, why, don't they want me here? But they didn't. So I went back to the employment agency and I said, they don't want me. It's clear they don't want me. Okay. And so they sent me off to British Leyland, and that was wonderful. Everything went just fine there. But these were little things that I never figured out until literally decades later. Like, why did that happen? It was just confusing for me.
Because again, that was what year?
That was 1974 and 75.
74, 75. So as far as groups of Pakistani individuals in that area, in that area of the world, it was a much smaller population than today.
Much.
So
yeah,
I think that's an important thing to point out, because as groups that are foreign to a land become bigger in that land, They start to get, I think, a little more comfortable with, imposing perhaps their way. So in that year, it was still a tiny percentage,
Yeah.
but yet you felt this alien atmosphere
Oh, yeah.
already.
It was kind of scary. And in anyway, and that was another thing that was so different for me. I'd never experienced anything like that before. But I'll tell you, in 1980, I went back over Christmas for a month with my mom. She'd won a
Mhm.
trip to anywhere in the world Air Canada flies. And she was quite elderly. And I said, look, Mom, let's go to London. I know it very well. And, if anything happens, we can easily get help because she was very elderly and not that well. But anyway, there was a local pub. And we used to go down to this pub. We were there at Christmas and New Year's. You have to have a local, or you did. And so, but we were also going around and checking out others, tourist stuff, right? And at the local pub, there were two young men. And let me see, one of them I think was named Warwick. And they were working in Saudi Arabia on the oil rigs. And they were telling us how they had to wear stockings on their legs underneath their pants because even if it was Saudi Arabia, it got so cold out on these rigs.
Yeah.
And the incredible amount of money and ostentatious expression of it that was happening now in the Gulf, because this was a new thing for them now to have all this money. And a lot of people aren't aware of it, but Saudi Arabia actually had a bit of a revolution of its own. That's another story in 1979 when the Kaaba was seized.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And that is actually what led to the billions of dollars that have subsequently poured into Western educational systems. But that's another whole story. So we're back to Warwick and his friend. And they just love my mother. And they would come get us at our little bed sit there. And we would go for walks, over in the park and anyway, stuff like that. But we went to a pub one evening, my mother and I. It was called the Wellington. And there, it was obvious that, and they were talking about, these huge vehicles going through London with all the money and the tables laden with food and stuff. And we had gone to this pub and an Arab man joined us, and he was an international lawyer. And he was very cozy, I must say, and bragging quite a bit about his international connections. And, they're graduating, like 10% British lawyers now to Temple Bar. When you look at the graduating class, very few are actually British. They're graduating a lot of others, and this really isn't a great idea. But anyway, he wanted me to come down to his estate, if you can believe it, south. I don't know, it was maybe 27 then, 26, down in south of London. My mother was highly amused because she knew I could handle myself very well and I wasn't going to have any problem with this gentleman in the pub. But he bragged so much about all the influence he had. We're talking 1980 already. And Harrods Department sold. And when that sold, I tell you, I was shocked. It's a British icon. Why are you selling it to foreign parties? I don't understand. This is the bedrock of Islam, of Britain, and you're seeding it, okay? This
Sold to the Al Fayed family, right?
Yeah. So anyway, then I was working as a social worker, and you were wondering about my past, okay? And I met this Baha'i fellow. Then we had 911. I've also worked, in policy and government, written briefing notes. I understand very, very well how government works, and I have administered countless acts over the years. And I'll get back to that later because one of them is very significant. But anyway, so I was working for the government. All right, we had 911, and I remember exactly where I was when I heard it coming over the radio.
Yeah, as many people do. I do as well. Yeah.
Radio was on all day. I called my husband. Of course, we're glued to the television set, watching people jumping out of buildings. It was absolutely a nightmare. This is when I went from reading biographies about people and life events of Muslims, ex-Muslims, people who had basically escaped Islamic regimes. Until then, inspired by this Baha'i encounter, I switched over to the Doctrine. And at first, I was reading the Bill Warner did some very simple, very easy to understand books that, show you what is Sharia, what is Islam to women, the story of Muhammad. But, that's just a start. I had to have the actual text. So now I have, basically all of the foundational doctrine right here on my computer. And I've noticed that like people really do not appreciate how very, very, very fortunate we are to have this in English. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when it comes to Islam, this is something I want to get to later, but the prayers, the greetings, all of these things that they are beholden to say are in Arabic. And it doesn't matter if you are in Pakistan, or if you are in Egypt, if you are in Arabia, if you are in the UK, if you are in Canada. What matters is that you speak Arabic.
Yeah.
People have no idea what is going on. And I'll get to that. I'm jumping ahead here. Anyway, so I started studying the doctrine very intensely. I'm talking thousands and thousands of hours, untold hours. Anyway, eventually I ended up, I was trying to reach out to, different politicians and authorities. And eventually I started working for an European think tank. And I was with them for almost 3 years. And then I formed Perspectives on Islam, which gave me a lot more flexibility to do what I wanted to pursue, exactly the things I thought needed to be pursued here as opposed to, somewhere else. And I did write 2 books. Now, this one here is a primer. All right. This is a collection of the essays I started writing, or articles I started writing after I left the think tank. It's called Timeless Essays About Islam and Its Doctrine, what it includes and why it matters. And what it does is it links the doctrine to everyday events, right? And it's timeless because the same sort of things happen in everybody's life over and over, and the doctrine doesn't change. And then most recently,
so just quickly, that is a book. The relevance of that book, the importance of that book, is to understand the events of today from the perspective of Islam and the way
perspective of
Muslims,
the non-Muslim,
of the
perspective of
non-Muslim,
the non-Muslim. For
of the
instance, there's an essay in there about what does good mean. All right. Like people have a conversation and they think they're talking about the same thing when they're not talking about the same thing at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Good in Islam means to follow Sharia. Truth is from Sharia. Truth is revealed. It is not discovered. Innocent. You are never innocent if you do not accept Allah and Muhammad. Okay. So there are so many words. It's called forensic linguistics. Like, I am approached on, I'm on LinkedIn, and I quite often get invitations because you can't follow me unless you connect. And I get invitations from people that are suspect. And why do they want to follow me, really? Because I'll tell you, I started a YouTube channel. And when I still had only 30 followers, one of them was already a legal advisor to the Palestinian Authority. Because I am speaking about the doctrine, and I will not be diverted. Okay. These are distractions. Whether we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood or we're talking about any terrorist organization, 80-90% of terrorist organizations in any Western country, and they just change their names like I change my socks.
That's right.
Like, I do not get excited about these because they are simply heads on the Hydra. The Hydra, the source that creates them, that has created them for 1400 years and will continue to create them until it is recognized and neutralized, is the doctrine itself. So that's it. It all comes from that. So,
and it's funny you bring that up because recently, and I'm talking about within the last few days, I actually had a back and forth with somebody on X, and it was either somebody who was Muslim or is somebody who maybe is favorable to Islam, doesn't know that much about it, and kind of feels like hey, it's wrong to talk poorly about Islam. I wasn't sure which one of the two it was, but it was an exchange that went sort of like this. She was telling me how there's no such thing as a concrete set of moral principles that exist in the world. So her view of morals was very contextually based, which I think is very relevant to Islam as well. Because you had mentioned Islam talks about the truth. It prescribes to the reader the truth, and therefore is very open, or it's very possible that Islam is going to tell their adherents about what the truth is, depending on what Islam's goals are in that particular moment. A very easy way to shift morals around, and so not have a foundational set of moral principles that if Muslims see Islam or the adherents of Islam doing something that doesn't follow what Islam is supposedly supposed to be teaching, it can very easily be explained by advocates of Islam, scholars of Islam, by saying, well, no, you got to look at it like this way. And therefore, anything that Islam does and Muslims do can be twisted to be okay at the end of the day, including violence. So it's an interesting thing, that this conversation that I had, because I very much disagree. I think there is a foundational set of morals and principles and ethics, and somebody's a conscience that should guide you between good and evil, right and wrong. Whereas this individual didn't believe that at all. She stated that it just kind of depends. And if we're going to go about structuring societies and communities around, it kind of depends, then we're going to live in a world of chaos, I believe, a world where everyone's going to do whatever they want and then justify it based on, how good it is for them or whatever group they're in or whatever the case is. So I don't know if that conversation that I'm talking about sort of resonates with you with regards to.
There's a difference in moral codes if she was offered as a child bride or had her dog beat up. So I disregard. I mean, this is just someone who is totally uninformed and determined to remain so. And I spend my time speaking with people who realize there is something wrong and they're curious. That's all. And I want to preface this by saying I absolutely love people. I really do, or I would not be doing this. This is not how I plan to spend my retirement. Yeah. And I'll also say that Muslims are people too. So back to the German lady. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. I published an article, which I have to stop doing. I really have to stop doing, because I end up involved on social media. And people are asking me questions and they're tagging me. And that's exactly what I want. I want people asking questions. I want people learning how to use the doctrine. I love answering their questions, but I'm trying to get this book written, and like this new book. And it's a really important book, and I'm not going to talk about it right now, but I did write an article. And I'm happy to say it's had almost 20,000 views combined now in different places. And I sent it to many German newspapers. Whether any of them will decide to publish it is, well, it's very doubtful. Germany is very, very captured. Yeah. But nevertheless, and here's the other thing I was saying earlier, how grateful we should be that the doctrine is in English, even though now it is being filtered, stuff is being removed. I know that. Anyhow, because there are so many countries that don't have that advantage, and Islam thrives in the dark, absolutely thrives in the dark, and that's against Muslims too, okay? They aren't really adequately informed themselves, many of them. They're raised to believe that the unbeliever is terrible, 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 horrible things are taught to them. Yeah. And that Muhammad is absolutely perfect, and their teaching is 100% one-sided, totally one-sided. And I mean, they're learning the Arabic before they even understand what it means. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, when you get pushback, I very rarely get pushback from Muslims, because I always provide the doctrine, and they know that's the doctrine. They might not have been told this before, but there it is. They can look it up, right? Just like I haven't heard some of the doctrine they use, okay? You hear what's important to you. So anyway, I wrote this article, and what it was about was a group in Germany. It's called AK Polis. And here in the West, we have these so-called moderate Muslims who are getting a lot of traction. The cameras are rolling, there's money flowing, and they get to, invite to parliament. I can tell you for years I've been trying to reach Canadian politicians, and I have given up. Okay, it's useless. The other countries, UK, US, much more profitable. So that's where I spend my time. The UK is deaf, but they have entertained in Parliament, and that's both sides. Okay, they have entertained in Parliament this fella Tawhidi. All right,
Yeah.
and Tawhidi has. Well, I've heard him lecturing in Australia. He's all over the place.
This is the Imam of Peace, I believe, right?
Yeah,
That's
if
how
you
he
go to
dubs
his
himself.
website, it's basically a booking page, all right? He is not recognized by Islamic authorities at all.
He's an Iranian, I believe. Shia.
Yeah, Shia. He talks about the Sunnis quite a bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, not to get too hung up on him. It's the point is that there are these groups that they're very, very comfortable in the West. This is a very comfortable berth. You get to have your cake and eat it too. You can be a Muslim. You can belong to this wonderful community with this secret society, sort of its own language and everything, and your family is, and your friends are, and I understand all of that. But they want to defend it, and they don't realize some of them are sincere, of course, but I have no doubt that some of them are not. Okay. And they understand that this is a way to distract people in the West. They listen to them because they're being told what they want to hear. But all roads lead to Islam. There is no moderate Islam. There is no radical Islam. There is only Islam.
Exactly.
And it goes one way. And eventually you end up with a theocracy that is deciding what the rules are for your state.
Yeah.
So anyway, I wrote this article about AK Polis because AK Polis itself has some notables, I won't name, some very famous people who are involved helping with this. But it's one of these moderate movements, which we also have in Canada. I'm sure you have in the US. And it has these very notable people who frankly don't seem to understand the doctrine. It's not widely available. My book this one has been translated into French. I didn't get onto that. This is the one everyone needs to read. And even if you're a newbie, you don't know anything, it's okay. And it ends with legislation. Anyhow, it's also available in French. What happened was a woman in Belgium got hold of me like within a week of this being published. She read it so fast. And she said, we have to have this here. In the summer, she had gotten on a tram and into Brussels. She was the only woman in the car not in a hijab, and one of them kicked her. Now, this is typical for unveiled women in, say, Egypt. They are looked on as less than. They are spat at. They are poked with pins. They are treated abominably. This is normal for Islam once it has control. So we did that between the two of us. We managed to get it translated in 3 volumes. The last one was published in January. And so I started publishing some of my articles in French, also on Substack. Well, this was Germany. A friend got hold of me from Austria, and she said they've got this campaign going. And in this campaign, they have these pictures of Muslims doing things that Muslims do not do. It is haram. It is antithetical to Islam. It's absolutely wrong. And they know it's wrong. And the models they had in a similar campaign a year or so ago got death threats. So this time they used AI. That's how wrong it is. But these are the people who are advising German authorities. These are the people who are getting the support of notable people who are trying to fight the Islamization of their countries. They're giving support to this group. Now, this group, this campaign is funded with the help of 2 other groups, both of which are funded by a woman from Turkey, a Muslim, okay? who founded an Islamic, like a mosque. She founded what's called a liberal mosque, okay, with gays and stuff. And she has a foundation as well. She funds both of these, okay? Those are the other two prongs. There's three-pronged support for this campaign. Well, everything in it is just basically a lie.
Yeah,
And
it's funny you bring it up because I recently ran into this subject matter where there's campaigns happening. Just so the audience knows, there's campaigns happening in the Western world to try to communicate to Westerners that Islam is this sort of moderate thing, and there isn't there. It's not. It's compatible with the West and the Western values and Western culture. I saw a billboard that it was produced where it shows it's actually in German, I believe, and it
yes,
says, "I'm a Muslim, and yes, this is alcohol," and he's holding up a glass of whatever hard
that's the
alcohol.
campaign.
Yeah, that's what you're talking about. And when you said that, I recognize immediately. So just so the audience knows that, because a lot of this is happening in Europe and not yet in Canada and the United States as much. So I want the audience to know this is what you're talking about. There's this effort by Western elites, particularly on one side of the political spectrum. This typically comes from leftist elites, leftist politically. So try to communicate to Westerners, don't worry, this is not an extremist cult or anything like that. These people are like us. And it's promoting these ideas like Muslims drink alcohol as well, when that is not at all the case. That is absolutely foolish to suggest this. And it's amazing how these campaigns are trying to twist and manipulate the minds of Westerners to make them think everyone they're all just like you, and it's very much not the case. Sorry, I wanted to educate the audience a little bit more on this particular matter. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. No, anyway, so I published that article in German as well on LinkedIn. And did I say I sent it to
When was this?
newspapers?
Sorry, when did you publish it?
I published it on Substack and on LinkedIn this week in German.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and French and English.
Okay.
And I must say, I'm trying to write this other book and trying to do it in other languages. Really, it increases the workload. But you know what? We have to all help each other, because the Ummah, Islam, is a nation.
Yeah.
And if we cannot set aside our differences, I don't care what they are, and work together to protect the freedoms that we have, we won't have them. Like, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So I wrote this article and published it. And you know who pushed back? 2 Germans. One of them, ambassador, retired. And all they could do was attack me. Oh, they said terrible things about me. It was hateful. It wasn't hateful at all. It didn't talk about people at all. It talked about doctrine. Anyway.
So they didn't push back on anything you
and
actually
that I don't
said.
know anything about Islam.
Yeah. So
No,
they weren't
They
able to push back on the
said.
substance.
Yeah.
On the substance of what you said. Yeah. But
why do you do this? You're just it was really bad. And of course I responded respectfully.
yeah.
I said, please tell me what it is you have issue with here in regards to the information I provided. Any doctrine you think is wrong, please, confine yourself to the article information. And eventually they left. And I will say that I blocked them. But the woman, okay, was an architect, is an architect. And this is the sort of fake, self-satisfied, smug, better than now kind of attitude that is really, really destructive. She tries to discredit me. Well, good luck. And when I looked at her profile, who she reposted? She reposted was an article from a German woman in Germany, who had done a little LinkedIn post saying, I'm afraid to admit that I'm fasting at Ramadan. And this woman reposted that, full of sympathy. What fake suffering is this? Since when is anybody afraid to admit they are
It's
fasting at
absurd.
Ramadan
It's
in
absurd.
Germany? This is a joke. How much courage does it take to support an individual who is making up stories like this? What do they say about the women who are suffering in Afghanistan, the people
Yeah.
who are killed in Iran? Oh, well, that's a bad government. That has nothing to do with Islam. It has everything to do with
Yeah.
Islam, but they don't want to go there. And all of these Islamic organizations that we have in our countries, that are being funded in our countries, that have charitable status in our countries, what do they say about their Muslim brothers and sisters they're supposed to care so much about? I will tell you beyond any shadow of a doubt, I care more about those people than they do. They say nothing. And I write about it quite frequently because
Yeah.
it's appalling. And we need to help them, because if we don't, one day that's going to be them. And
Yeah.
I'm
And
getting ahead of myself here.
this
But there is,
includes the people of
yeah,
Iran right now. I had the conversation with somebody only yesterday about the Iran war, and I had said to this individual, out of every single Iranian I've ever met in my life, and I mean this literally, every single Iranian I have ever met in the past and know in the present is against this Islamic regime in Iran and favorable to toppling them. And they also recognize that the only way they're going to be toppled is through the actions that are taking place today with President Trump doing what he's
yes,
doing.
yes,
They're not going to leave. In fact, they're going to fight claw
yes,
and nail to the end. They will kill every one of their people to the
they
last
will.
one to maintain power, because it is just a gangster outfit over there with the administration. Just as if a mafia gangster organization took over, all they care about is retaining power and spreading this perverse message that they believe is the way to go. And they will kill, as they have demonstrated over the decades, they will kill thousands, and they'll kill everybody in Iran, their own people, if it need be. And they will look at that as necessary because
Yes,
it's in the pursuit of Islam. And if their own people do not follow their way of thinking, then they deserve to die. They're unholy, they're traitors, all of that stuff. So
yeah,
everybody I've ever known that's Iranian feels the exact same way. So when you hear these things about the support that these some people are going out in the streets of Iran and supporting the regime, nonsense. There is, of course, always going to be a tiny percentage that supports a wicked regime because they're brainwashed or they're benefiting from the status quo, whatever it is. But to believe that there's this significant group in Iran that actually supports this government, this administration, the regime, it's absurd. Talk to Iranians that live amongst you in the West. I have, like I said, never met a single one that doesn't want to get rid of this regime and knows it has to be done by force. They will not go unless they are forced to leave.
I've heard it said, people want to ignore Islam, but Islam does not ignore you.
Absolutely.
And the reason the price of oil is up at the pumps has nothing to do with President Trump. It actually has everything to do with the doctrine itself. That is the reason. Iran exists because of the doctrine itself. We really have to focus on the source here. And that is for the sake of Muslims as well, but certainly for non-Muslims. Like those poor people in Iran, look what they have suffered to try and get their freedom. How long did it take the Spaniards to get free? What was it, 7 centuries?
Yeah.
It is not easy.
Yeah.
And, people go, well, gee whiz, look at what they're doing to the dogs, and poor dogs, they can't speak for themselves. Well, I can tell you, those people in Iran, they can't speak for themselves either, and I'm saying, a lot. The very first copy of this book was sent to a man in Iran. He had connected with me on LinkedIn. He was clearly terrified. He was, I believe he's probably dead. I'm quite sure he's dead. But he was I don't want to give too many details just in case somehow he has survived.
Yeah.
But he had a professional position and there was a debate and he came out And of course, there's two sides in a debate. And he came out on the side that was opposite Sharia. All right. You're supposed to in a debate. Well, he lost his position. And, the tortures his family went through, like after 1979, etc. And long before this blew up here, recently, he told me how, members of his family had been imprisoned. His uncle had been taken away. He'd been shot. They told the family if they wanted the body back, they had to pay for the bullets. This isn't something new. We heard this recently. This was happening years ago. Happened to his uncle. He said they were monitoring everything he did. And I said, please be careful, because, he wanted to like things on LinkedIn. He couldn't, right? Because he was monitored. And then after I gave him this book, which I gave him an EPUB because there's no other way he could get it in Iran. And, not long after, maybe a month after, his profile disappeared. I've not been able to contact him since. But this is what people have to live through every day. And if people do not want to have to live through that here, then they need to face up to the fact that Islam is antithetical to all of Western values.
Absolutely.
It has its own declaration of human rights that follows Sharia.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the number one reason for Western vulnerability, you were asking me about that, is simply that we underestimate Islam. And, this isn't, it's a system that produces the state, not one that exists within it. When it is strong enough, Islam takes state control. That's what a theocracy is.
Yeah, and that's what a totalitarian system is as well. When you have an organization or a movement that speaks to every single aspect of your life, total control of your life, no matter in what context, be that as an individual, be that as a family, be that in relations with your community, in relations with the government to the people, the citizenry. Islam is totalitarian. It has a prescription for all of these things, including economic matters, everything. Relationships, every single kind of relationship. It is a totalitarian system.
Sorry. It goes for the icons first. It wants the churches converted to mosques. It goes for Texas. It goes for London. It goes for New York. It goes for Toronto. It goes for Paris. The icons, that's what it takes. And it always does. Okay?
Exactly what we've seen. We have a Muslim mayor in New York now. Exactly this.
Well, after 9/11, okay, the trade centers were the highest buildings in the world. You know what the highest building is now? It's Al Khalifa.
Yeah.
Okay, the Khalifa. Yeah.
Yeah. In Dubai.
Yeah. And you gave me a few questions before this began. So one of the things I looked up was Saudi Arabia. All right. What is the basic law of governance? So this is where we're headed if we do not smarten up now. Okay. The basic law of governance states that the Quran and Sunnah are the Constitution. All governance derives its authority from them, meaning law must conform to Sharia. Article 1, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a sovereign Arab Islamic state. Its religion is Islam. The Constitution is the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of his Prophet. How do you like them apples?
Yeah, that's very important to understand, because if you let Sharia law into your Western civilization, into your Western nations, you are by definition taking your Western values and throwing them out the door and replacing them with Islamic Muslim values coming from this Sharia, which those values are very much in many, many ways the exact opposite of Western civilization in the way they look at women, in the way they look at all kinds of things, even the way you form your economy and capitalism and things like this. If you let Sharia law into your nation, you are by definition throwing out, as you said, the constitutions of these nations, the foundation of Western civilization, freedom, liberty, democracy. It's all out the door if you let Sharia in, and let it in even an inch.
Well, the kids, we're kids. This has been going on since 1979, literally, okay? The educational systems have been infiltrated. Basically, all institutions have been heavily infiltrated. And then we have events like Charlie Hebdo events and things like that instill the fear of God in people, like, oh, what's going to happen? So what do? They appease it. They cater to it. So they hire, Islamic people to vet publications, for example. Now, when a book like mine, it's self-published, and I can't tell you how hard it is for somebody like me, some little old lady somewhere, to try and market her own book. It is only people that I can reach personally. There is no company out there doing it for me. And it makes a vast difference. I'm trying to get it into the hands of the most important people. I have honestly given away as many books as have been purchased, and I have sent them to politicians and other influencers. And sometimes they even read them. I know sometimes they do. But it's very, very difficult because, like, if you go to like something like Amazon.com and you just type in Islam and see what comes up, and you're going to find at least 80 or 90% of the books you are looking at are favorable towards Islam, right? They can say anything. They can lie from beginning to end. But books like Dr. Andrew Bostom's, The Legacy of Islamic Anti-Semitism, it's been delisted. Peter McLaughlin's book, Easy Meat. Okay. This is about the grooming gangs in the UK. It was published first in 2014. It was delisted in 2019. And then in 2025, you have the legislators coming out. They say, no, oh, well, we didn't know anything about it. Well, this is, plausible deniability. Certainly, if you get rid of people like me and people like Peter McLaughlin and people like Dr. Andrew Bostom, you're going to hear exactly what you want to hear. Sit down there and listen to Tahiti.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, this is no accident with censoring people who are critical of Islam, or more accurately, who are realistic about Islam. This is no accident. This is driven by, I think, starting with the community, the Muslim community, is going to these people, typically the people, domestic politicians in these countries, and saying, "Hey, this is going to cause Islamophobia." And that's how they shut this down. That's how they shut down the truth. I know you're very well aware of that.
What is that? Word. You give away the heritage of future generations for name calling. My goodness, if you don't have an argument more substantial than that, you should get one.
And a perfect example of what is antithetical to Western civilization, the fact that we have free speech, the fact that we value free speech, we have debate. And immediately you can see here as the perfect example of what happens when Islam encroaches in the West. They immediately shut down debate and free speech because they have to. They do not want to be exposed. They don't want that light to shine on Islam in the reality of what it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I was saying, if you go to any of these Islamic organizations and look at their websites, it's all about Islamophobia and activism. They're producing guides hand over fist, like this campaign, AK Polis. If it's successful in Germany, they'll export it to Canada or Australia or wherever there's a receptive audience. It's like, in Australia, they published a guide for hospitals. With Muslims, you're supposed to eat with the right hand. Well, the nurses are now having to hand feed people sometimes because they refuse to eat with the left when the right is injured. So they have this book about protocols, how you must treat Muslim patients. Next thing you know, there's one in British Columbia. They go from community to community because it is a network. It is the Ummah. All speak the same language in regards to Islam.
Yeah.
It's
and the
Ummah,
by the way, for the audience, spelled UMMAH, is what the Islamic community is called in Islam, the Ummah. Go ahead, sorry.
And a major failing of the West is its refusal to how to say this? Okay, They only recognize war when it is declared by a nation state. All right. But for Islam, the doctrine itself is that declaration. Mm-hmm. Because all throughout it, I have a friend who calls it a war manual, and basically that is what it is. Okay. Yeah. Jihad is extolled throughout it. Anyone who doesn't believe that just simply isn't paying attention. The zakat that they tell people this is almsgiving. They always say this is for the poor and needy. This is for the poor and needy. This is for the poor and needy. It has 8 categories. And one of them is jihad, very clearly. And that includes activism. And in fact, the National Canadian Council of Muslims in Canada is authorized to collect zakat under the category of fi sabilillah, and that is the cause of Allah. And they use it for activism, for legal procedures, setting precedents, protocols. California is really bad for that. Right now, they're introducing a bill to introduce 2 Islamic holidays. And I will say that the recommendation at the end of this book for legislation needs to be brought in at the very highest level. So you don't find yourself with some Islamic states within the states, because that could really easily happen the way some of them are going. Washington has been entertaining, CARE diplomats, Council of American Islamic Relations, for years now. Yeah. I'm talking hundreds of legislatures that, pay, it's called bayah in Islam, to Islam, loyalty. They're just looking for votes.
Yeah,
it's appalling.
Exactly. There is this alliance, but it's called the Green-Red Alliance. Typically, the leftist side of the political spectrum is allying with the Green, which is a representative of Islam in these Western nations, to gain power within the West politically. And what I've been talking about a lot is, and what I think is going to happen soon, Elaine, and the next step of the political process in the West, as far as Islam's goals, is they're going to, like they did, as an example, in the Iranian revolution in '79, when the communists and the Islamists overthrew the Shah together, and then they did what? They went to war against each other, and the Islamists won. So this left red-green divide that was even present back then eventually will separate, and they will go to war against each other. And this is what I think is the next step in the West. Islam, the Muslims have been voting for a party like the Green Party in the UK. Well, once they get more organized and they're ready to take the next step, what I believe is going to happen all across Europe, Elaine, is that you're going to start to see Islamic political parties popping up, and you're going to start to have block voting by Muslims for these Islamic parties. And just because they're Islamic parties, every single Muslim is going to vote for them because they're told they have to as a good Muslim. And these parties, these Islamic parties in the West, in Germany, in France, they're going to rise to power, national power. And then that will be their opportunity to change the laws and implement Sharia law on a national formal level. That is what I believe is coming next, and coming in the next 5-10 years as they go down this road, gaining momentum politically in Western countries. What are your thoughts on that, as far as the future rise of Islamic political parties and the block voting of Muslims in these Western countries, in these European countries?
I'm thinking that's something you can see, and you're very aware of it. What people aren't paying attention to is what the corporations are doing, because all they care about is the bottom line.
Absolutely.
It is absolutely incredible. And our governments are pandering to them. They don't even have to have their own political party, because our political parties are doing their work for them.
Yeah.
I'm not even worried about Islamic parties. Really, I'm not.
Well, I'm saying it's the inevitable evolution of this, because at the end of the day, these people will always look at the non-Muslims, the leftists that they're cooperating with right now, as infidels, no matter what. They're using them as useful idiots, And the next step is to put them to the side, like the Islamist regime in Iran put the communists to the side and said, okay, we don't need your help anymore to overthrow the Shah. We're not going to work together with you at all. In fact, let's go to war. We're going to destroy you, eliminate you, because you are also evil and you are also an infidel. In fact, you could be some of the worst ones, because as communism is, it's godless, right? So that is what I believe is coming very, very soon, is the rise of Islamic political parties in the West, which will tell every single Muslim in these countries, you must vote. And when you have a voting participation rate in Western countries like Germany, France, UK, United States, Canada, at a 50% level or 60% level, and you have Islamic parties who are going to be block voting at a 80, 90% level and up, it's going to be a clean sweep. You don't even need to have similar population sizes at that point. You can actually have a much smaller population, but if 90% of them are coming out, or close to 100, it's going to be a win nationally. And that is the next, I think, piece of the agenda, is get these parties in power in a national way, and then start doing what the Muslim Brotherhood attempted to do in Egypt when they won that election, which is to use democracy to destroy democracy.
Well, we're at a tipping point now. I mean, we're hanging by a thread. I don't worry about the Muslim Brotherhood. To me, that's another red herring. Back, in the 80s, they were, when they were, oh, I've got the little book here. I'll wave it at people. There we go. The memorandum, the explanatory memorandum of the Muslim Brotherhood. This was written about 1988. And towards the back of it, it's got a list of different organizations, including the Muslim Student Association, which was formed in 1965. Hamas was started in 1988. So we've got, I think, the Islamic Circle of North America. All of these are Islamic society. They have spawned many children, all right? They estimate there's 600 different organizations in Texas, and I know there's over 2,000 in Canada. And they all march to the same tune, and that tune is played by Allah and Muhammad. That is the common denominator. Anything else derives from that. So there's no point in getting all sidetracked about, well, this is what some Sufi says, or this is what, Shias are more hierarchical than Sunni. Sunni, basically find an imam and get yourself a fatwa. It's anything goes. So it doesn't matter. There's so many organizations out there. When we start talking about, the Muslim Brotherhood or something, we are getting off track. Never get off track. Do not lose focus, because all of them, whoever they are, must be consistent with the doctrine. And the doctrine is dualistic. So you can find a verse. For instance, there's a verse in the Quran that says full well that Muslims can eat what the Jews and the Christians do. It's Quran 5:5. There's another verse in the Quran that says that they have to not have pork, not have nothing with hooves. Anyway, so it's pick and choose. And when Islam first comes to a country, you hear what are called the Mecca verses, and those are what the kids are taught in school. They're taught the Mecca verses, and how Muhammad was extremely intolerant. Many events in his own life are in the Quran. I mean, what the Quran says is that this is the complete final revelation, and the book has always existed, all right, and that parts of it were given to earlier prophets, beginning with Adam, if you can believe, okay? So, and that the Quran, that's the seal, okay? It is closed now. This is the whole thing. If this is the whole thing, then tell me, how was the rest of it written without Muhammad? Oh, well, I suppose it's because Allah knows everything. But there are so many loose ends in the Quran and conflicts. It's just incredible. But that is why it is dualistic. So The kids are taught the softer verses, and throughout they're consistently told how vile and vicious and cruel and horrible all the rest of us are. And I'm not talking Jews, Christians, Hindus. I'm talking any disbeliever, ex-Muslim, atheist. It does not matter. We are all in the same bucket. And we need to realize we are all in the same bucket and set our differences aside. When I was a little girl, with all these brothers, they had the boxing on one day. Every weekend, watch the boxing. And I happened to be wandering through the living room. And there was a man you couldn't miss. His name was Haystack Calhoun. You could actually find him on Wikipedia. He was like somewhere around 600 pounds. Enormous man. And there were 12 men in the ring. So this particular kind of a boxing match, it was the last man standing. And the 11 of them got together and they threw Haystack out of the ring because they knew if it got down to 2 or 3 of them, they'd never be able to do it alone.
Yeah.
So we need to set aside all of our differences and realize that Islam has the same attitude towards all non-Muslims and all disobedient Muslims. About a month ago, the highest, rates of execution have been happening in Iran for a long time, and they weren't all non-Muslim. If anybody dares to critique Muhammad, they got a noose around their neck.
Yeah.
And so so Muslims need to understand that this will happen to them too. The Western Muslims who want to pretend this is not going to happen, this will happen. So recently in Nigeria, about a month ago, there was a group of Muslims that were killed. Mm-hmm. And the president admitted, it's actually in print, that this group had not wanted to go along with jihad. So we've got 14 centuries of Islam weeding out, there's a lot to be said for, genetics and stuff. Like when you spend 14 centuries killing off the most humane people, what happens? Every population has a group that are authoritarian. The authoritarian personality in any population is generally around 20%, and that will increase under times of stress. So we saw that during the COVID event, all right? That some people suddenly became enforcers in a big way. Yeah. And in fact, with some occupations, you look for the authoritarian personality because ordinarily these are people who will accept authority, but they also expect their authority to be recognized. They're very hierarchical. So, for instance, police officers, they want someone who will take commands and who will enforce law. So that's perfect for an authoritarian personality. So these are the people that are rewarded in Islam, the enforcers. The doctrine demands enforcement. Children are to be rewarded if they have enforced Islam somewhere. They're not required to, but they're to be rewarded if they do. And that is by the hand, okay? So there's hadith that say that by the hand first, and then if not by the hand, then by the mouth, and if not by the mouth, then by the heart, and that is the least of faith. So this is why you have people parading around in Texas, imams. You got a perfectly good Muslim there. He's happy selling meat or pork or, alcohol or whatever he had in his store. And what comes along but an imam with a loudspeaker and a big crowd of enforcers behind him who are going to shut him down because he's daring to sell something that's not halal. Well, What does that do to your halal industry? Your food industry, your abattoirs already in the UK, the abattoirs, they're primarily Islamic. The halal food produced by non-stunned slaughter, which isn't labeled, far exceeds the needs of the Islamic population in the UK. So it's all kinds of people like you and me eating it, and we don't even know it because they won't label it, because I won't buy it. Because halal contributes to zakat. Zakat contributes to jihad, which I explained earlier. So when you buy halal, you are financing jihad against yourself.
Yeah,
and that includes Muslims, because the ones who don't want to go along, they end up suffering too.
And by the way, for the audience, the halal slaughter of animals is extremely violent and makes the animals suffer a great deal of pain. And in the West, we of course have a lot of, and appropriately so, animal rights and empathy for animals and sympathy for animals. But in Islam, that doesn't happen, even addressing their halal practices. And you had mentioned that, you know, there's so much halal going on that it exceeds the needs of even the community that believes in this. Therefore, it is spreading into the Western community that is not Islamic, because that is their goal at the end of the day. They want that to be enforced in a 100% way. So when you say things like, oh, why don't we just let them have their halal? Why don't we, that's their community. You got to understand that's not their goal. Their goal is to do that as a first step, get it implemented for their community as a first step, and then move on to everybody, which is essentially the way Islam is in general. It's first give us what we want as a community, and then we'll move on to you, the non-believer, and you will be under the prescriptions of Islam. Can you, Elaine, expand on Zakat? You talked about that briefly. You mentioned it very recently. Can you explain what that is and how it fits into jihad?
Well, I just wanted to mention the Royal Society. Well, it was actually a Society for Protection of Cruelty to Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.
Mm-hmm.
Was founded in the UK in 1824, and it got royal patronage around 1860. And look at what's happening there now. Just yesterday, I saw a woman walking a dog on her own street who was told by the police that it was upsetting the Muslims there and she needed to move the dog away. Now let's get serious. This is just ridiculous. So, and one more thing.
But it's not, by the way, it's not just about dogs. This is another element of imposing Islam step by step by step. That's what that is about. It's not just about a preference of dogs and how you think about dogs. The Westerners have to understand the bigger picture of what's happening with every one of these tiny steps that Islam is imposing in the West. It is it is a means to an end. There is a bigger goal. Start slow while you have a small population in these Western places. Work with Westerners to whatever extent they need you to do. But as the population grows, this cooperation from Islam, this seeming cooperation, this apparent cooperation, is not going to remain the same. It's going to turn into, no, we're not asking you anymore. We're telling you now.
Well, they turn a blind eye to so much. Like a very dear friend of mine was telling me that at work, she works with a Muslim, and he was talking about one of their recent celebrations, and they just got themselves an animal. I'm actually not sure what animal it was, and they took it up to Duncan and they sacrificed it in their backyard. They're not too fussy, and one needs to realize how much of restraint is purely a result of West's current position. Once we lose that,
yes,
all bets are off. It's going to be slavery. And I mean, there still is slavery. Anybody who thinks slavery has stopped is absolutely asleep. In fact, there are even Muslims being prosecuted for having slaves in Europe now. And it's, the Yazidis, does anybody care what's happened to them? What happens to the kidnapped Egyptian women, the kidnapped Indian women?
Yeah.
And all of that is going to be back in full force because slavery is halal, folks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come with a label either.
Yeah.
So,
what Westerners need to understand as well is that there's not a single nation state, not a single country that is majority Muslim today where it wasn't imposed by violence. Every single nation, including the Middle East, was at one time, places like Egypt, places like Syria, these were Christian countries. And Islam came in with the sword and with even Muhammad leading the way as their warlord, conquering these nations by the sword, by violence, by bloodshed. unlike Christianity that spread through proselytizing, teaching people about this way of life and this righteous way of looking at
Well,
life and treating
a
others.
lot of it is done by trade. Okay, so if somebody is sitting and waiting for a sword and doesn't see one, you don't need to see one. It'll happen long before that. There's a fella wrote a book, and it's just called Submission. It's by Hulabet. It's a novel, and it's about France. He's been in hiding pretty much ever since. So many people who have stuck their heads above the parapet, especially in Europe, they end up in hiding, and all it talks about is basically the slow decay of the society and turning away from traditional values and acquiescing. And then one day he comes back from the school holiday, and now there's Islamic control of the university. A few things have changed with government. He's told that if he wants to adopt Islam, he's fine to teach there. If not, then he's not. And if he does, they can find him another wife if he would like one, etc. We can increase your salary. Everything will be fine. Oh dear, I've told the end of the book. I'm so ashamed of myself. It is an excellent book. Please, I recommend it. But, in addition, like what's happening in the schools here with the halal and Ramadan and all of this, I mean, Islam was deliberately established to be in opposition to all other beliefs, even in the mundane, okay? Muhammad said the Jews and Christians do not dye their hair. So you dye yours, so you will be different from them. I mean, how mundane is that?
Yeah.
So they fast all day, not for, Friday, no, for a whole month, but it's imposed on everybody else. So, I mean, there are alcoholics who sell or serve alcohol. There are vegetarians who serve steaks. Nobody has a problem with that. They go to a lunch bar, they just take what they can. That never happens with Islam. Yeah. Always the demands, okay? And what's happening in the schools now in Europe, I did an interview with a German teacher, Austrian actually, several months ago, and he's quite desperate. He's been teaching for 40 years. The amount of violence in the schools now, and that's another thing. We have UK politicians coming out and talking about, the violence in the jails, and isn't it terrible, these institutions. Well, schools are institutions, and nobody is talking about what is going on there with those vulnerable children. And they are totally outnumbered in many classes, and in some, they don't exist at all. The native children, they're harassed for being blonde or beaten practically every day. I am seeing examples of this, because people send me material all the time. And sometimes they're saying the Shahada just to make it end. And he was telling the story about one little girl who, she went to her mom and she said, Mom, he was always telling me I needed to come to Islam, and so I did. And now every day he's saying I need to wear the hijab. I'm not allowed to eat this anymore. And the mother called the school and said, what in the heck is going on at that school? And the mother said, well, there's nothing, we can't police everything. This is going on in their classrooms. So anyway, they, most recently there's a school that, like I say, they're so sanctimonious about it. The title on this school is, not racist, we are, just, anyway, wonderful, inclusive and all the rest of it. What did they do at Ramadan? That the native children were told to turn away while they were eating, all right? That wasn't good enough. Some of the little girls ended up forced to put their lunches in the garbage. The Muslim children were making vomiting noises while they were trying to eat. Some of the children finally went outside in the cold in the winter to eat because they were being harassed so much. A couple of years ago, there was a Hindu man in Pakistan. He had his restaurant open at Ramadan. How dare he? He was killed. So, people, never mind, give them an inch, they take a mile. It's a heck of a lot more than a mile. It could be your life. And I just, I do not want to be alarmist about Muslims, because nobody can read a person's heart. All right? That does not change the fact that there is an incredible threat against the West, and we need to address it. And if Muslims really want to look closely at their own doctrine, which I highly recommend, they can also read my book. And they can realize that it does not last, that Iran is not some aberration, neither is Afghanistan, neither any of these states. This is where Islam ends up. The comfortable birth will not last. And the doctrine is basically does nothing more than turn Muslims themselves into cannon fodder, because the whole objective is world dominion, domination, by fair means or foul, even by, reproducing children. He says, I will boast to the other prophets about your numbers. And it's not something external, it is internal. It is here. We have to address it with our laws. Look at the demographic projection. You could stop immigration tomorrow. It's not going to change the fact
exactly
that it will be Islamic if we do not take action to change our laws now.
And this is what I talk about all the time, is that this isn't a situation where one day we may be in trouble if we don't change. We are in trouble today based on exactly just alone on the thing you just talked about. If you stopped immigration today and you simply took into account the birth rates of the Islamic community in Western countries versus the birth rates of the domestic population, it is only a matter of decades until the Islamic population is the majority. So the problem is not coming. It is here. It needs to be resolved as soon as possible. Every day, every month that goes by makes this problem even harder to resolve. And it actually, every month that goes by makes sure that we will inevitably get to a place in Western nations where there will be civil strife and violence in the streets unless we solve this. We have a small window left. This is the 11th hour, a small window left where we can do this peacefully. And if we don't start changing laws and changing things peacefully, inevitably there will be conflict in the streets. There will be a clash of civilizations. That's already the case. That's not coming. We're not potentially in trouble. We are in trouble right now. The demographic situation alone points to that, let alone every other way that this aggressive force of Islam is pervading into Western civilization, Western countries. It's more than just obviously the demographic aspect of it, the birth rates, but just that alone is ensuring the domination of Islam in Western countries. There has to be something done today. So my question to you, and this is a question, Elaine, that I think everybody who is absolutely, if you have something very important to say, absolutely.
I just wanted to say, Islamic doctrine, the Quran itself says we are deaf, dumb, and blind. We do not understand, and they take full advantage of that and know we are deaf, dumb, and blind, and we do not understand, and we will never understand. There is absolutely no way that we can regulate Sharia because we don't understand it. Bills to ban Sharia are a waste of time. Bills banning the Muslim Brotherhood. What we need to do is shore up our own laws because we have only ourselves to blame. I'm going to just read here briefly, the end of I started earlier, if I can find it again, about Saudi Arabia, It says, Article 1. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a sovereign Arab Islamic state. Its religion is Islam. Its constitution is the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of his Prophet. I told you that. Article 8. Governance in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is based on justice, shura, which is consultation, and equality according to Islamic Sharia. People don't question it. They just water off a duck's back. Article 7. Government in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia derives its authority from the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet. That's the Hadith, the Seerah, the life and story of Muhammad, everything he did, how he walked, which hand he ate with first, how he brushed his teeth. This is what Muslims are supposed to follow. Article 9. The family. Pay attention to this. The family is the nucleus of Saudi society. Members of the family shall be raised in the Islamic creed, which demands allegiance and obedience to Allah, to his prophet, to the rulers, respect for, obedience to laws, love for and pride in the homeland and its glorious history. So they are naming streets and schools in North America after Islamic conquerors. And we are tearing our statues down.
Yeah.
When I was a young woman, we were told that there was a population explosion And true, there had been a lot of babies born after the Second World War, but they were replacing people who had been killed.
Mm-hmm.
So we were told, and we believed it, because when I went to class, okay, there'd be 40 in my classroom. When I graduated from high school, there were 1,500 in that school. Now there's 800, and that's including the immigrants, because it was very effective. Hey, you've come a long way, smoke this cigarette, whatever. We turned our values on their head. And anyway, we were encouraged not to have children. And of course, the birth rate dropped dramatically. Yeah. So, and what have we taught? I mean, I have a school atlas upstairs. It's 20 years old, and it details the transatlantic slave trade, which of course was bad. It was very limited, though, like 300 years. You call that limited compared to 1,400? That's limited. I think maybe it wasn't even 300. I don't think it was quite that long, actually, was it? No, I don't think it was.
I think you're right that it was under 3 centuries of...
It was under 3 centuries.
Yeah.
And it's the British who stopped it. Wilberforce must be turning in his grave. They fought so hard for it. And when you read the Doctrine, you find out that they had nothing but contempt for blacks. Blacks today in North Africa suffer, okay? They're called Ab. They're derided. And yet you have, people are so misled. You had Muhammad Ali, who was named Cassius Clay after an abolitionist, changed his name to Muhammad Ali, both of whom were slave owners, traders, it's capturers. So it's just, anyway, so it talks about that. If you looked at LinkedIn, the guidelines, it tells you how to behave online. You must not deny things that are known to be true, like the transatlantic slave trade. None of them say anything about the trans-Saharan slave trade, the Cairo, the Algiers slave markets, the markets that there are today in Libya. They say nothing about any of that, like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So and love for and pride in the homeland and glorious history. What are we doing? I mean, we have so much to be grateful for. We have every single day to be grateful for. And back in 2019, I was sitting in a meeting and I was telling a woman about Islam and women. All right. And I heard a man's voice behind my head and he said, "I'm a Muslim." So I turned and looked at him and I said, "Am I right?" He said, "Yes, you are." I said, "How is it you're here then?" He said, "Because I was living in Saudi Arabia and I could not accept the teaching, and I knew I would end up killed if I stayed there." We aren't protecting those people either. We aren't protecting the Coptic Christians who have escaped here, the Baha'i who have escaped here. We pretend to be so noble that we have given these people refuge, and now we're throwing them to the wolves because we're letting Islam take over, ourselves. You asked about Zakat. Okay. So there are 5 pillars of Islam. One of them is Zakat. And Zakat, okay, is considered the second most important pillar after prayer. Now, after Muhammad died, there were what were called the Ridda Wars, the apostasy wars. A lot of people tried to leave. They did not want to be beholden to this anymore, paying their protection money anymore. They call it tribute. Well, there was mass slaughters, okay, huge battles.
Their protection money, that is a mafia tactic. Again, goes right back to mafia.
It goes a long ways before mafia.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying it's just synonymous with gangster behavior.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I think it was Abu Bakr who said, "If they try to withhold from me a single goat, I will fight them for it." Okay. It's extremely important because this is the Islamic taxation system. It not only has its own laws, okay, it has its own language, international, it has its own taxation system.
Yeah.
So, yes, it is not a nation state in the conventional sense. It is a nation. It is a
totalitarian ideology.
Anyway, so that's part of it. This second pillar, which is the Zakat. Now, what they're told, and this goes for a lot of Muslims too, they will absolutely believe that Muhammad only had 4 wives. Zakat is only used for charity. They will really believe this, okay? but it is not. It has 8 categories. And if you pick up an accounting manual today, all right, they have I forget the name of it. Okay, it's an authoritative accounting manual used for Zakat and Islamic finance and how it's spent, which, by the way, is a $300 billion, more than that, fraud. Islamic finance, I could talk about that some other time. But anyway, so Zakat has these 8 categories, and the one is jihad. And it says very clearly this for jihad. And if you look at, this is a classic manual of Islamic law, all right? And what this is a convenience. This is not Sharia. Sharia is not in a book. Sharia is the ordained way of Islam. All of it, including eating with the right hand. All of it, okay? It came from Allah and Muhammad. It's a law. Everything in life is either obligatory, recommended, permitted, discouraged, or forbidden. Okay, those are the 5 categories for everything. And you can find a lot of them in here. So, you know, I've answered that question 16 million times. I'm going to put it in a book. All right. So Zakat is in here, and it lays out the categories, and it says, as it says in the accounting manuals, is that there are 8 categories, and the Zakat should be divided equally. So, for instance, the Canadian Council, the Council of Canadian Imams, authorized the National Canadian Council of Muslims under that category, and they conduct a type of jihad. All right, it's not violent, but it doesn't matter, because jihad, as it says, you know, in the early doctrine, that, you know, if you have given a horse, you have contributed to jihad. All right, so it's all and that's what it is. But it is vast amounts of money. We're talking billions of dollars is collected in zakat. And some of it is financing Hamas and other endeavors, these activist organizations that are absolutely pulverizing our schools with books and guidelines that they say Islamophobia a couple hundred times on a page. And this is how the children are raised. They're raised to believe that we are terrible, that Islam is wonderful. They manipulate it so that if they go to court, they're demanding their rights according to the law, and they use the First Amendment in the United States. They exploit it as a way to get this. But religion is not allowed in the public school. So when it goes to school and we have World Hijab Day, it's described as culture. When you buy halal, you're contributing 2.5%. Okay, is paid from the profits, and that's divided into 8 categories. One of them is jihad.
Yeah,
and this is why 80 or 90% of terrorist groups in any Western country are Islamic. They have to be funded. Where do people think the money comes from?
Yeah. And as I said, if you are fine with halal, then you are simply making sure your civilizational values are on their way out the door. And that's an important thing to make sure of, that there is the prescription of let them have their way here, let them do their thing here. That is the first step to overthrowing your values, your civilization, the things you believe in, and the life you want to live. That's an important thing to keep in mind. One last question for you, Elaine. So our listeners and all of the people who are aware of this issue, of this problem with Islam in the West, we're all asking the same question, and it's a very difficult question because it's a long road to solving this problem. There's a lot of things that need to be done. There's no simple solutions. One thing that definitely is the case, no matter what the prescription is action. Action. We need to take action. We cannot wait for somebody to rescue us. Nobody's coming to rescue the West. Nobody's coming.
Certainly not some moderate Muslim. Okay,
absolutely
please.
not.
All roads lead to the same
place. They can't even speak up in their communities, as we know. Even if there were the case, they cannot. They cannot. So, what are we to do? What are we to do and I asked that question in two ways, and if it's not a question that can be divided in two ways, let me know. But what are we to do in two ways? One, as a people, as a citizenry in the West who want to keep our way of life, who value the West, who value our values and our ideals and our civilization, and do not want to give it up to Islam. What are we to do as citizens? And then the next part of that question is, what are our leaders supposed to be doing right now that they're failing at, but that they should be doing that will save the West?
Oh, well, listening to people like me.
Yeah, absolutely.
My invitations, like I said, I've given up on Canadian politicians. They're afraid
Yeah.
of being called a name. This is weak. This
So
is incredibly
conversation,
weak.
you got to have the conversation to start with. You cannot censor things. You cannot call people names because you don't like somebody saying something that doesn't sound good or doesn't whatever. We have to have this conversation. And it is the bedrock of Western civilization is debate, free speech. Okay, this is how we solve problems in the West is free
But you've
speech.
got to give me a chance to answer this question.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Okay. And first I would say is don't let anyone stop you from talking, but there is a way to talk and there is a way not to talk. What I talk about is doctrine because ultimately doctrine is what oppresses all of us. And that is something that can be addressed. So, and our governments, of course, are trying to silence us. Like just recently, they brought in a new one in the UK. It is a guideline. It is not a statute. It has no teeth. They did the same thing here in Canada. I think it was 2017, Bill M103. And, you know, they talk about Islam and don't anybody offend Islam. And of course, what they want to do is chill speech. All right. I would say don't ignore it. Of course, it's a sign, but be respectful. And I'm always respectful to people. And we should all be respectful to each other. But we do have to stop this. So that's number one. Never stop talking and become informed. If we stop talking, we are a slave. If we stop talking, we have lost. And I really recommend this book. Please read this book. You need to learn what Islam is. Now, our counterterrorist.
Tell us the title again.
It's called A Civilizational Reckoning. I published it in September. And, you know, we have counterterrorists. People think, oh, well, they'll take care of it. Counterterrorists are no brighter than anybody else. I hate to tell you this.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of them are. A lot of them are not. And it is heavily infiltrated with the same thing that we're seeing with Tawhidi. We're going to ask this person for advice instead of learn about it ourselves. Now, a lot of counter-terrorists will tell you about how wonderful Sun Tzu was, okay? This Chinese sage many, many years ago, okay? Well, they totally ignore Sun Tzu. Islam does not, all right? It says, know your enemy. They do not know their enemy. They ask for advice from people who adhere to it. They allow people to be sworn into government positions on a book that condemns the West, that it is the antithesis of Western values completely. Read chapter 3.1 if you want to know about values, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And chapter 10, 3 and 4 will tell you how we stop this so far as the government is concerned. So anyway, I better move on to that, is establishing a threshold. It is not difficult at all. Governments already do this. So say I went to apply for old age pension and I'm only 52 years old. They're going to say, well, no, you don't qualify. All right. There needs to be a qualifier. Now, you know, back when the Constitution was written, you know, God bless them, they did a wonderful job. The American Constitution is the envy of states right around the world. We wish we had it. Boy, do I wish I had it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, but you got to use it, you know. But the definition, they never thought there was any need to define religion. They did not understand. People go, oh, well, Jefferson, he had a Quran. So what? A Quran is only a fraction of the doctrine. This totally excludes the Sunnah of Muhammad. You cannot practice the 5 pillars of Islam without the Sunnah of Muhammad. He had no understanding of jurisprudence. So what if he had a Quran? That does not mean Islam is good at all. I mean, they were fighting the Barbary pirates. We all know that. That's
Yeah.
the first war the
The
U.S. ever
first
fought.
war was against Muslims.
That's right. So what they need to do is simply establish a threshold category. Okay, so all of these benefits that Islam currently enjoys and exploits extensively, such as charitable status, schools, finance, foreign funding, mosques, foreign funding of mosques, etc. All of that is allowed because it is recognized as it has legal status as a religion.
Exactly.
Now, it doesn't everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, but it does
Yeah.
in the U.S. It does
Yes.
in Canada.
Exactly.
And because of that, it is given all of these things. We'll
Exactly.
simply establish a threshold. And of course, it will take some courage. But my goodness, you have a lot to stand on.
Yeah.
Whoever is willing to bring this bill forward will be a courageous champion of human rights.
Yeah.
And all it does is say we need a threshold. In order to enjoy these benefits, it must benefit the state and its people. Okay. And so we need to make sure that we're not, for example, granting this to, cannibalism or something. We just need a threshold. And the threshold could be consistent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
All religions must do the same thing.
Yeah.
They all pass the same. My book has a guide to adjudication in Appendix E. UK gets Appendix A for the actual legislation. US gets Appendix B. Okay. And the guideline, which is essential, is in Appendix E because Islam allows deceit in the cause of Allah. All right. So it does need special consideration, but it will fail. It will fail on the basis of Chapter 3.1, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It will fail. And others won't. And they'll be worried because they've all been told, oh, it's an Abrahamic religion. It's just the same as all. It's not at all.
No.
Not at all.
No.
And they will learn that. And that is the only way to educate the public at large, because you and I have a hopeless task. We're never going to do it. It's got to go before the government. It's got to hit mainstream media. It's got to make a splash. People got to get angry, and then they're going to wake up.
That's right. And I've been saying this for a long time, exactly to your point. The fact that this is categorized as a religion just really hits the weakest part of Western civilization when it comes to accommodating anything that is dubbed correctly or incorrectly as a religion. And it has to pass the actual test that you're talking about for us to make sure it is not a detriment to the West and people in the West. And it will not pass that. It will not pass that even remotely close.
It is so simple. Okay. They're already doing this. They categorize things all the time.
Yeah.
Now, and the difference it makes is phenomenal. And I first became aware of this. I was administering the Child Paternity and Support Act. And the difference between a legal father who has all the privileges of a legal father and a biological father are vast. They're really different, okay? The biological father is still the biological father. If you're a Muslim, you're still a Muslim. Your private faith is not touched. This does not affect the First Amendment. Private belief is still private belief. You can believe whatever you want, but the state does not need to accommodate it and even facilitate it, which is absolutely what it's doing now. And most importantly of all is it needs to be aware of it, and so does its citizens. And like Saudi Arabia, we need to start honoring our own history.
Yeah.
I listened to a poor man in the UK. I couldn't believe it. He was on a program. He only spoke for a few minutes. He's obviously over 100 years old, maybe 105, and they had him as a guest on a program.
I know
and
you're talking
him
about
what he thinks today.
Yeah.
He almost died.
He served in World War II, was it?
World War II.
Yeah.
And he says, all the freedoms we fought for.
Yeah.
And we have fewer freedoms today.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you've got young people who have been completely brainwashed in the schools. They have no idea. They're too young. They've never known anything different. Well, I've known very much different way of life here, where families were respected, where the history was respected, where, you sang the national anthem with pride. And we need to get back to that. And the sooner the better.
Yeah, the individual you're talking about, by the way, for the audience, is an individual that was on a UK morning show, I believe, maybe an afternoon show. There was about 3 other people on the show with him. They were the co-hosts of that show. And they asked him, as a person who fought in World War II against the Nazis to save Western civilization from this Nazism, they asked him, what do you think about what's going on today? And they didn't think he was going to answer the way he did. And he surprised them by saying the honest truth, which is that he's looking around the UK, and he broke down crying because he said, I can't believe we fought and risked our lives and lost so much for things to end up this way, where we've given up all of the things that we fought for in World War II and risked and sacrificed for, all to end up here where we are today with everything falling apart and back to a place where what I've always said, the closest thing to Nazism, Elaine, since Nazism is Islam, a totalitarian death cult, a cult that glorifies death. It is imperialistic. It is aggressive, highly manipulative, but nothing but a totalitarian cult masquerading as a religion. And that's, like I said, that is one of the weaknesses in the West, is that we're recognizing this as a religion. If there was any other cult, and we've had death cults show up in the past in Western countries, but because we didn't allow them to be, we didn't accept their ability to say we're a religion, we disqualify that. We recognize right away, this is not a religion, this is a cult. This is a brainwashing cult. And we said, no, you're not a religion. You will not have a place in our society, because your place in our society will only lead to the downfall of our society. The first step is to recognize this is not a religion like other religions. It is a death cult.
We can blame corporate interests for a lot of this too. And I'll tell you something, is that with Queen Elizabeth, all right, the first Queen Elizabeth, there had been that fight with the Vatican over Henry's extra wives, and they were banned from the traditional trading routes. So, the Catholic Anglican split there. And so they were sending tradesmen, explorers off, across the Asian sort of land, looking to get to these spices. And of course, they were coming back with, they're meeting with sultans and muftis and things like that. And at that time, Britain was very insignificant. It was just some little island somewhere, right? But it was religious. And so these traders came back to Elizabeth, and she asked them, what is their religion? Because there's this big problem here now with the Catholics. And she was told that they were kind of heretical, that they were more like English English religion. They were more like the Anglicans than they were like the Catholics. So all is good. So people will say whatever you want to hear when there's a profit motive or a vote motive or whatever involved. And we need to be very aware of that. But in regards to Nazism, I just want to read something out of my book here, because I have a section of the book, I've called it Islam versus Islamism, because people want to attach all of these modifiers to Islam. There is no modifier. There is only Islam. There is only Islam.
Exactly.
Okay. So I devoted a little section to that. And I wrote, for example, Nazism is classified as an ism because it represents a structured ideology and movement with specific principles, doctrines, and practices. It encompasses political, ethnic, and economic theories that shaped a government under Hitler. And in 1935, it legally differentiated between identifiable groups, between the Germans and Jews, through the Nuremberg laws, all of which are equally apparent in normative Islam. So we're having a real hard time ending this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I sort of spoke to this before we went on air, that we will not have a shortage of things to talk about, and so we would definitely love to have you on again. I hope you consider to come on again. I think there's many more things we need to talk about, right?
Mike, we didn't even finish question 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. And these things, all of the things, I mean, we're 1% in all of the things we need to talk about, but we do need to talk about them all. And if we don't, we're going to be continuing to be in great danger. So I
Yeah, I agree.
appreciate you coming on, Elaine. I appreciate it very much. I hope our audience got to enjoy this as much as I did. I'm sure they did. And we look forward to having you on again. Thank you very much.
And I thank everyone for listening. If you listened right to the end, gold star.
Okay, one last thing. Can you tell us about where we can find you, where we can follow you?
Um, I have actually got a YouTube channel. Now, I don't use it a lot. Like if you, if I have a link to this, I will link it to your channel, not mine, right?
Okay.
So I'll put it down in featured videos, and hopefully some of my subscribers will see that. I'll put a little note about it in, and then they'll go to your channel. Because I really, really deeply believe we all need to help each other as much as
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah.
But I have that. And the main reason I have that was because there are some basics, okay? Like that Muhammad had slaves, women before and after Islam, things like that. I had 10 that they're educational, and like Islam in the workplace, halal and Islamic finance. Um, uh, you know, so these are just basic educational topics. They're in that in my YouTube channel. And because there are people who have great difficulty reading, okay, they might be, driving in a car all day. They're working. They got kids. They don't have time, but they might sit down and watch a video once in a while or something. And primarily because, like I said, we have it in English. So many don't. When the French edition of my book was published, I wanted to see what they had in France. Well, that classic manual I just showed you, they don't have that. They don't have the Sirah. They don't have Ibn Ishaq. They don't have Tabari. They don't have hardly any of the Hadith in French. They're blindsided. Like if you're Romanian or something, you have no idea. So I read my entire book, into 40 episodes. I made it into a podcast. It's on YouTube. You can go to
Great.
the podcast tab
Yeah.
and you can watch it in any subtitle. So, if you have a friend who's more comfortable with Romanian or, whatever, Nigerian, whatever language they speak, please give them this because, these other countries, they very much need our help.
Yeah.
And so you can watch it subtitled in any language you want, Spanish, anything. And of course, the story from the Belgian woman is one of the reasons that I came to realize how important it is for other people to get this information because they don't have it. Anyway, so I'm there. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Substack. I'm on X in a small way. I've discovered that X really prefers either sensational or celebrity, one or the other. If you aren't one or the other, you don't go far. So, but on LinkedIn, my posts do very well. And I think that's most of it.
Okay, so we're going to post all those accounts of yours in the description of this video, and we're going to make sure we're going to do our best to have as many people go to those accounts and follow you as well. It's important that they do, and I appreciate this again, Elaine, very much so. Looking forward to continuing this conversation. So much more to talk about. I appreciate your time. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, Mike.